Working at the theater wasn't my dream job, far from it, but it gave me what I needed. A clean slate, a place where I could try to forget about the things I'd done. Petty theft, drug possession. Those aren't things you shake off easily, especially when you've been caught. But here, in this dimly lit theater, I was just another usher in a red vest and tie, not Alex, the screw-up. No one here knew my past, except maybe Ethan. Ethan knew a lot more than he ever let on. But I'll get to him later. For now, all I had to do was follow the rules. That's what they drilled into you during training. Never break the rules. Most of them were normal enough. Don't leave the popcorn machine on too long. Always check the tickets carefully. Don't let customers sneak into movies. But there were a few rules that stuck out. Odd ones. The kind that made you think maybe this theater wasn't like the others. The most important one was rule number 1. Never open the door to room 3 once a movie starts. I didn't ask why at first. None of us did. It just hummed there, unspoken, like a warning no one wanted to explain. The theater itself was strange. It looked normal enough from the outside, just a regular old building with a neon sign flickering out front, promising the latest blockbusters like Avengers, Infinity War, or Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. But inside, something felt different. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and the halls seemed to stretch longer than they should. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I'd swear some rooms moved. The garbage room, for example. Every time I walked past it, I felt a cold draft that didn't belong. And the air ducts, those were another story entirely. But no one talked about it. We just did our jobs and kept our heads down. Ethan, the manager, was the kind of guy who'd been around the block a few too many times. He didn't say much, but when he did, people listened. He'd been running this place for as long as anyone could remember, though no one really knew how long that was. Ethan was an enigma, but if you watched him closely, you'd notice how he always kept an eye on certain rooms, room 3 especially. There was something about that room that unsettled him, and if it unsettled Ethan, it scared the hell out of the rest of us. I remember my first week there like it was yesterday. I had been assigned the late shift, the one no one wanted, but it didn't bother me. I liked the quiet, the way the theater seemed to settle into itself when most of the patrons had gone home. I was sweeping up in the main hall when I saw it for the first time. Smoke, thin and wispy, curling out from under the door to room 3. It was faint, just barely noticeable, but enough to make me pause. I heard something too, muffled voices, like someone was trapped inside. My stomach knotted up. I knew the rule. I wasn't supposed to open the door, no matter what. But then I heard it again, a low moan, like someone in pain. Every instinct in me screamed to help, to do something. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. For a second, I thought about throwing the rules out the window. How could a rule matter more than someone's life? That's when Ethan appeared. I hadn't even heard him approach, but there he was, standing just behind me, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with those cold, calculating eyes of his. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Step away from the door, Alex." His words were calm, but there was something in his tone that made me freeze. He didn't look angry, just scared. I didn't think anything could scare Ethan, but there it was, plain as day. I stepped back, my hand dropping to my side. And he nodded. "Good. You almost made a very big mistake," he said. I wanted to ask him what was inside, why I couldn't open the door when it sounded like someone needed help, but the words stuck in my throat. Ethan didn't offer an explanation, and I didn't push for one. I think, deep down, I already knew. Whatever was in that room, it wasn't something you could explain. Not easily. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The smoke, the voices, it all felt too real. I was shaken, more than I wanted to admit. The rules had always felt like a formality, but that night, they became something else, something bigger. I started to realize the theater wasn't just a job. It was a place that demanded obedience. Every rule had weight, and breaking them didn't just get you fired. No, it could cost you a lot more than that. Ethan didn't bring up the incident again, and neither did I. But after that night, I noticed how he watched room 3. Whenever a movie was playing in there, he made sure to be close by, always keeping an eye out like he was waiting for something to go wrong. And maybe he was. Maybe he knew more about what went on behind those doors than he let on. I wanted to ask him, to get some answers, but something told me it was better not to know. The less I understood about Room 3, the better. I should have listened to that instinct. But curiosity has a way of digging into your mind, even when you know it's best to leave things alone. I wasn't going to forget what I saw that night. Room 3 had become something of an obsession, and no matter how much I tried to focus on my job, on staying out of trouble, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something was wrong with that room, and sooner or later, I was going to find out what. It didn't take long after the Room 3 incident for things to get even stranger. I was doing my best to shake off the tension, convincing myself that maybe I'd imagined the smoke, or the voices, or both. Maybe I'd been working too many late shifts, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed the strange things going on at the theater. There were whispers among the staff, but everyone seemed too scared to say anything out loud. I kept telling myself that if I just stuck to the rules, I'd be fine. I didn't need to understand it all. I just needed to do my job. That's what I told myself. But then Iron Man showed up. It was late again, one of those quiet nights where the theater felt more like a tomb than a place of entertainment. The last movie had just let out, and I was tidying up the lobby, thinking about how nice it'd be to finally get home and crash. That's when I saw him, Iron Man, or at least something that looked like Iron Man. He was standing by the entrance to the garbage room, motionless at first. The costume was old and decaying, the red and gold armor rusted and cracked. There was something off about the way he stood, something unsettling. My first thought was that it had to be some prank, maybe a leftover Halloween decoration that someone had pulled out of storage. But then he moved. I froze where I stood, broom still in hand, as Iron Man turned slowly and started walking toward a small group of children who had lingered near the concessions. I hadn't even noticed them until now. They looked confused, like they weren't supposed to be there, like maybe they'd stayed too long after their movie ended. But instead of running back to their parents or heading for the exit, they just followed him. No questions, no hesitation. They fell in line behind him like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the decaying Iron Man led them toward the garbage room. Something in me snapped. I dropped the broom and took a step forward, calling out to the kids to stop, but my voice barely sounded like my own. It was weak, distant, as if the words didn't matter. I could feel this deep sense of dread creeping over me, like something terrible was about to happen, and I was powerless to stop it. But I had to try. I started moving toward them, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, each step harder than the last. That's when Ethan appeared. He was there in an instant, out of nowhere, just like he had been that night by Room 3. Only this time, he wasn't just watching. In one hand, he held a jagged knife, the blade chipped and worn, and in the other, a small vial of some kind of liquid that shimmered faintly in the dim light of the lobby. Without saying a word, Ethan splashed the liquid at Iron Man's back. The moment it hit, the figure let out this horrible, high-pitched screech, like metal grinding against metal. I swear I saw smoke rising from the costume as it stumbled backward, retreating toward the garbage room. The kids, now snapping out of whatever trance they were in, blinked in confusion and started crying. Ethan grabbed them and hustled them back toward the lobby, away from the door. The garbage room door slammed shut behind the retreating figure, leaving only silence in its wake. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to ask Ethan 1,000 questions. What the hell had just happened? Who, or what, was that thing? But before I could even get a word out, Ethan grabbed my arm and pulled me aside, his face deadly serious. "Never go near the garbage room," he said, his voice low and full of warning. "There are things in this theater you don't want to understand. Just follow the rules, and you'll be fine." His grip on my arm tightened, and for a second, I thought he might say more, explain what the hell was going on. But then he just let go and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the theater. I was left standing there, my head spinning, trying to process what had just happened. The kids were already being led out by another usher, none of them seeming to remember what had just transpired. It was as if they'd been under some kind of spell. I couldn't shake the image of that decaying Iron Man from my mind. What was it? And why was Ethan so prepared, like he knew it was coming? The jagged knife, the vial. He hadn't just reacted. He'd been ready. That night, as I finished cleaning and closed up the theater, I couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan had said. There are things in this theater you don't want to understand. He wasn't wrong. Every instinct in me screamed to stay far away from whatever was going on here, to keep my head down and follow the rules. But it was too late for that. I'd already seen too much. The next few days passed uneventfully, but the tension was there, hanging in the air like a thick fog. I noticed the way Ethan watched the garbage room now, the way he lingered near it whenever he had the chance. He was always on edge, always ready, and I couldn't help but feel that something was waiting in there, something that had only just been kept at bay. But how long would it stay that way? The other ushers didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. To them, the theater was just a job, a way to make a little money while getting through school or life. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I started paying more attention to the details. The strange draft that came from under the garbage room door, the odd way some of the rooms seemed to shift when no one was looking. And I wasn't the only one. Ethan was watching too, always keeping his distance, but never far enough away. The rules weighed heavier on me now, especially the ones I didn't fully understand. Why was the garbage room off limits? What was really inside room 3? And why did the theater need rules that seemed more like warnings for survival than guidelines for work? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. The rules weren't just there to keep the theater running. They were there to keep something far worse from getting out. I thought things couldn't get any worse after the Iron Man incident, but I was wrong. The theater had more secrets than I'd ever imagined, and the more I learned, the more I wished I could forget. There was something about this place, something alive, always watching. Ethan's cryptic warnings haunted me, but I still had to keep showing up for my shifts. I was starting to understand that the rules weren't just there for show. They were there to protect us. But I didn't know from what, not yet. And then came Rule 4. I had been at the theater for about 3 years by then, and even though I'd seen things I couldn't explain, I still didn't expect what happened next. It was a quiet night, as they always seemed to be when something terrible was about to go down. Most of the customers had cleared out, and the only sounds left were the faint hum of the projectors and the rustle of popcorn bags in the trash. I was finishing up my usual sweep through the halls when Ethan found me. He had this look in his eyes, a kind of resignation I hadn't seen before. Without a word, he told me to follow him, and I did, like always. He led me to room 4, which I'd barely paid attention to up until then. It was just another screening room, or so I thought. I couldn't remember the last time I'd even been in there. It was off the main hallway, tucked away in a corner, and I figured it was one of those smaller rooms that got used for older films or niche showings. But something was different that night. Ethan opened the door and gestured for me to sit down in one of the back rows. The theater was empty, but the screen was on, flickering with the dim glow of an old film reel waiting to start. "Watch," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "Whatever you do, don't leave until it's over." I didn't understand, but the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. There was no room for questions, no space for refusal. I sat down, and before I could say anything else, Ethan walked out, leaving me alone in the dark theater. The film started rolling. At first, it seemed like a normal movie, some grainy footage of the theater itself, back when it was first built, or so it looked. The images were black and white, showing employees from decades ago walking through the lobby, cleaning the seats, selling tickets. But as the film went on, it started to feel wrong. The people on screen weren't just working, they were watching me, their eyes tracking my every move, even though I knew they couldn't possibly see me. The reel crackled, the picture flickering in and out, and the footage shifted. I saw a man tied to a chair in the middle of the theater, his face twisted in agony. He was someone I recognized, an old employee, one I'd seen in a faded picture hanging in the break room. His name was Henry, and he'd worked at the theater years before I'd started. The film showed him struggling, his eyes wide with terror, as something moved in the shadows behind him. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I saw it clearly, a massive non-human figure, hulking and distorted, creeping closer to Henry. I wanted to look away, to run out of the theater, but something held me there, something stronger than fear. The rule: Ethan had said not to leave until it was over. I couldn't break the rules, so I stayed, my eyes glued to the screen as the creature came closer, its breath heavy and unnatural. It whispered something into Henry's ear, words I couldn't make out, but I saw the effect they had. Henry's face went slack, his body limp, and then the creature began its work. I can't describe the rest of what I saw, not in any way that makes sense. It was too horrific, too unreal, but the message was clear. Henry had broken the rules, and he was paying the price. The film didn't just show his punishment, though. It showed me something else, something I hadn't wanted to believe. The rules weren't just about keeping the theater running smoothly. They were about keeping us alive. When the movie ended, I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't move for what felt like hours, trying to process what I'd just seen. The room felt colder now, emptier, like something had been drained from it. I wondered if that same emptiness was creeping into me. Ethan came back, silent as ever, and stood by the exit. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. "Now you understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but there was nothing to say. He was right. I understood now, more than I ever wanted to. The rules weren't optional. They were survival. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, cleaning up after customers, tearing tickets, but my mind was elsewhere, stuck in that room with Henry and the thing that had taken him. I kept replaying the movie in my head, over and over, trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be found. All I knew was that I couldn't let myself end up like Henry. Ethan didn't talk about what happened, and neither did I, but I could feel the shift between us. He knew I'd seen too much now, that I was no longer just another employee. I was part of something bigger, something darker. And then, just when I thought I couldn't handle any more, Ethan came to me with another revelation. Room 3 wasn't just a threat. It was getting stronger. Time was running out, and the rules alone might not be enough to contain it. The weight of that knowledge settled over me like a thick fog. I wasn't ready for what was coming next. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready, but I didn't have a choice. Room 3 was waiting, and sooner or later, I'd have to face it. The weight of Ethan's revelation hung heavy on me, even as I tried to go about my usual tasks. Room 3 wasn't just dangerous. It was alive, waiting, growing stronger, and now Ethan was telling me that time was running out. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I understood enough to be terrified. I had seen too much already. Henry's fate in that horrifying movie, the Iron Man figure leading those kids into the garbage room, and whatever else lurked in the shadows of this theater. But Room 3 felt different. It was more than just another strange room with its own set of rules. It was the heart of everything. Ethan had always been cryptic, but now his usual calm was replaced with something else. Urgency. We were standing in the break room, the fluorescent lights flickering above us, as if even they couldn't bear to be in this place any longer. He paced back and forth, hands clenched into fists, and I could see the toll the theater had taken on him. The man who had always seemed so in control now looked haunted. And that's when he dropped the real bombshell. We were going to break the rules. "You don't break the rules," I said, not even sure I believed my own words. "That's the whole point of the rules. You can't break them." Ethan stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "We don't have a choice anymore. Room 3 is getting stronger, Alex. If we don't do something, it's going to break free, and when it does, there won't be anything left to contain it." "What do you mean, break free?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Room 3 isn't just a room. It's He paused, searching for the right words, though I doubted there were any. "It's a kind of gateway, a door to something that shouldn't exist in this world. And that door has been trying to open for years. The only thing keeping it shut is us. Following the rules, making sure no one opens it. But it's pushing harder now, trying to trick people into breaking the rules, just like it almost did with you." I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin as I remembered the night I'd almost opened the door, the smoke, the cries for help. I had been so close to making the worst mistake of my life. "So what are we supposed to do?" "We're going to break rules 10 and 11, Ethan said, his voice flat, like he had already made peace with the decision. But I hadn't, not even close. "What?" "Ethan, that's insane. "You're always telling us to follow the rules, no matter what. And for good reason," he said, cutting me off. "The rules are the only thing that have kept this place from falling apart. But they're not enough anymore. Breaking rules 10 and 11, it'll buy us more time. It's the only way to keep room 3 from breaking free." I didn't even know what rules 10 and 11 were. They were part of the rules that no one ever talked about, the ones that seemed more like myths than actual guidelines. But now Ethan was telling me we had to break them to survive. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be another way, but the look in his eyes told me there wasn't. Ethan had been here longer than anyone, seen more than anyone. If he thought this was our only option, then maybe it was. That's when the door to the break room creaked open, and she walked in, the lady in black. I had heard whispers about her from the other ushers, stories passed down from employees who'd been here before me. I thought she was just another legend, something made up to scare the new hires. But there she was, standing right in front of me, as real as anything else in this cursed theater. Her long black dress dragged along the floor as she moved, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. In one hand, she held a goblet, the liquid inside it shimmering like molten silver. Ethan didn't even flinch when he saw her. He stepped forward, almost like he had been expecting her all along. "It's time," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. The lady in black nodded, and for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but there was something ancient in it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "You know the cost." Ethan nodded, his jaw set. "I know." I wanted to scream, to grab him and tell him not to do it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching as he reached for the goblet. His hand shook, but his resolve didn't waver. He brought the goblet to his lips and drank. The effect was immediate. Ethan's face twisted in pain, his skin growing pale as the liquid flowed through him. But he didn't stop. He drank it all. When he finished, he set the goblet down on the table and turned to me, his face now deathly white, but his eyes still sharp. "I'm buying you time, Alex," he said, his voice barely a whisper. 13 years. That's all I can give you." "What do you mean, Ethan? What's going to happen?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past me, out of the break room, and down the hall toward room 3. I followed, but I didn't dare say anything. The air in the theater had grown colder, thicker, like the building itself was holding its breath. Ethan stopped in front of room 3, his hand resting on the door handle. He looked back at me one last time, a faint smile on his lips. "Remember the rules, Alex. They're the only thing that'll keep you alive." And then he opened the door. The darkness that spilled out of room 3 wasn't just shadows. It was something deeper, something that felt like it could swallow the entire world. Ethan stepped inside without hesitation, and the door slammed shut behind him. I ran to it, pounding on the door, shouting his name, but there was no answer. The door was sealed now, locked tight, and no amount of force could open it. The lady in black was gone. The theater was silent. I was alone. Ethan had sacrificed himself to keep whatever was inside room 3 contained, but it wouldn't stay locked away forever. He had given me 13 years, just like he said. 13 years before the door would try to open again, and when that day came, I would be the one standing in front of it, alone.